Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Becky Goldstein for a refuah shlema for her grandson Eitan Ephraim ben Ayelet and her husband David Mordechai ben Rezel for a successful operation. Refuat hanefesh v'haguf. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. We were learning about Achitofel. From there, we're going to move to David HaMelech, and we're basically going to compare David HaMelech's sin, King David's sin with Batsheva, and why it's different. Why doesn't he lose his portion in the world to come? And kind of how does he relate to what happened and how does he deal with it? How did it come about? We're going to have all sorts of questions about it, really delve in depth into there. From there, we're going to get to Geichazi. Remember? From there, we're going to get to a censored part of the Gemara, which takes our very long daf and makes it even longer because in the printed edition, it's just not there. So we're going to have to read an extra long portion today, and which is cut out, and which is all about Jesus. Section, and from there we're going to actually get started on the next mission. And I'll just make some quick announcements. So again, the Shiur is coming up, so please register. It's on Wednesday. And number two, Rabbanit Michelle Farber is back with Machshava Shniya. She's had a 3-part series on the death penalty throughout the generations. So if you haven't heard it yet, I recommend listening. The 3rd part went up this week. And also, we're going to talk about Ezov, and we spoke about the Erez the other day, and that's the topic of flashback for this week. Amal Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and by the way, just to let you know, there's a special shiur going up probably today of Alana Stanhain, actually not related to the daf. Instead, we decided this week to do something different. One of the things that Alana wrote about in her book, Circumventing the Law, is all about Michirat Chametz, selling chametz. So she's going to give a special shiur for Pesach that will go up on specifically the whole circumvention of Michirat Chametz. So if you haven't sold your chametz yet, maybe you should listen to the shiur first and then sell your chametz. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, beginning of our daf. Lo alam al yavi adam atzmo lidei nisayon. You shouldn't try to bring a nisayon upon yourself. What's a nisayon? God testing, right? The best example of a nisayon is Akedat Yitzchak, right? The binding of Isaac. Don't bring these things upon yourself. And now we're going to learn how the whole story about Batsheva came about according to the Midrash here. David Melech Yisrael hevi atzmo lidei nisayon v'nichshal. David brought this upon himself and failed. Okay, what's the background? And this is what we see many times in our Masechet, what arrogance can lead you to do. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam. David says to God, Mipnei ma omrim Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Why does everyone in their prayers say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? Ve'ein omrim Elohei David. They don't say the God of David. What happened to me? Amal, inu minsu v'alo minsatli. He said they were all tested and you weren't tested. They were tested. They passed their test. You weren't tested at all. Now we're going to see later that there's one reference to the fact that God didn't want to test David because he knew that he wasn't going to stand up to the test. And that's what he's basically saying to him. You weren't tested, and there's a reason you weren't tested. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, bachaneni v'naseni. But David says, go for it. Test me, right? Livchon, like a test, and linasot, like a nisayon, right? They're both kind of similar words. But, go for it. I can handle it. How do we know this? Now, in general, remember, David wrote, it's miyuchas, that it's claimed that David wrote Tehillim. So in all these discussions, we're going to take different psukim from Tehillim and show what the Midrash is trying to say from the psukim. So here's a pasuk from Tehillim, Shene'emal, Bachaneni Hashem v'naseni. Okay, there you have it, right? David says, Bachaneni and naseni, test me. Amal, so God said, fine, menaseni lach. Va'avidna milta ba'adach, deliditu lo hodatani, v'ilu ana kamodina lach de menasena le b'dvar erva. But God says, I'm going to do something different for you than I did with the others. The others, I didn't tell them what their nisayon was. I just did it. And they had, the kind of, like it came as a surprise. They weren't really prepared for it. But you, and maybe because God was worried about him, you said, I'm going to tell you what it is. Right, modan alach. I'm going to tell you that minasen alach bidvar erva. It's going to be something of a sexual connotation, a sexual category. That's what it's going to be in your nisayon. Miyad vayihil eit erev vayakam David me'al mishkavo. So immediately, now we're going to read. This is the pasuk where the whole thing happens. Okay, where it starts. We're in Shmuel Bet Yud Aleph Bet. Vayihil eit ha'erev. I'm going to read the whole pasuk first. It was evening. Vayakam David me'al mishkavo. He got up out of his bed. Vayitalech al gag beit hamelech. He walked on the roof of the king's house. Vayar isha rochetzet me'al gag. And he saw a woman bathing on the roof. Right, it's famous. Everybody knows that. Vayisha tovat mareh me'od. And she was very beautiful. Few problems in this pasuk. Why did he get up from his bed in the evening? Like, what's going on here? And and when he saw this woman, like, why wasn't she covered? It's a little bit strange. Women don't normally bathe out in the open, even on their roofs, right? Roofs are exposed. So we're going to have a story about this. So when it says Vayila Eta Erev Vayakam David be'al mishkavo, they're going to understand this part of the pasuk a little differently. When it says he got up from his bed, what is this talking about exactly? Well, imagine David knows that Erva is what's going to get him. So he starts preparing himself for that. So I can deal with this. Obviously he couldn't, but he tried. Amar Rav Yehuda, shehafach mishkavo shel laila lemishkavo shel yom. What it means, vayakam me'al mishkavo, means he switched his whole bed routine, meaning he started having sex with his wives during the day instead of at night, figuring that then I'll satiate my urge during the day, and then at night I won't come to think about other women. However, nit'ama mimenu halacha. Now, normally this means he forgot a halacha. Now, this doesn't mean a halacha is not a halacha. He forgot something that's just a known thing, which is what? Ever katan yesh ba'adam. A man has a small limb. Must be, oh, ra'ev. Mar'ivo saveh. If you satiate it a lot, it just gets hungry for more. And if you starve it, it will be satiated. So by having sexual relations during the day, he basically just increased his urge at night. And he didn't realize that that's how, he forgot that that's how it worked. So he thought this was a good solution, but in fact, it actually was worse. So now he goes on the roof. And he sees this woman. I already read you that part of the pasuk, and she was beautiful. She was washing her hair under a beehive. Okay, there's different interpretations of what this chalta is, but we'll go with a beehive. Ata satan idmele kitziparta. We're going to go back to this bird. The Satan comes and disguises himself as a bird. Patak begira. So David's on his roof. Now he doesn't see Batsheva. He sees a bird. So he shoots an arrow at the bird. Pat kalachalta. But what happened is the arrow shot right through the beehive and it fell apart. Igalia, Geichazi, and that's how he saw her. So again, the Satan, that was the whole nisayon. This goes back to who had a nisayon. Eov had the nisayon with the Satan, right? So also, if you remember, they attributed the Satan also. They bring up the Satan in the Akedah story also with Abraham. So anyway, here's the Satan, and that explains why he sees her on the roof. Miyah v'yishlach David, right? Then it continues the psukim and says. David sends the next pasuk. Vayidrosh leishai, finds out who she is. Vayomer halozot Batsheva bat Eliam, eshet Ruya Achiti, right? She's Batsheva, eshet Eliam. She's the wife of Ruya. I'm sorry, bat Eliam. She's the wife of Ruya. Vayishlach David malachim vayikacheh. He sends messengers. They bring her. Vatavo elav vayishkav ima v'hi mitkadesh mitumata v'tashav al beita. So he has relations with her. He sleeps with her. She was pure, meaning she wasn't in nida at the time, and she goes back to her house. And this explains the pasuk. It's a different pasuk now, which said in Tehillim, which says, "Bachanti libi, you tested my heart. Pakadet balayla, right? Visited me at night. Tzeraftani bal timtza, you tried me, but I wasn't found to be innocent. In other words, I didn't succeed. Zamoti bal yavor pi." Okay, I'll go with the translation in the Koran. Let no presumptuous thoughts pass my lips. Okay. What is this zamuti bal yavor pi? So they're going to darshan this. Amar, iku zamama nafal bepume deman desaneli. Okay, let's start with the end. Man desaneli is the one who hates me, which really is a euphemism for himself. And if the beginning is iku, which is really like ilu. If had a zamima, what's a zamam? It's a muzzle. Had a muzzle been put on my mouth, meaning had I not been so foolish to utter those words to God and say, test me. Okay, so if my mouth had been muzzled and I hadn't said those words, below amar ki ha-milta, right? And I hadn't said those words, I would have been spared. But, sometimes we open our mouths when we shouldn't. We say things that are foolish, and that's what caused his downfall. So that whole thing was to really show us that David, right? We remember we started with Okay, you might not remember. Lo'olam al yavi adam atzmo lidei nisayon. Don't try to bring a nisayon upon yourself. Because look at David. He brought the nisayon. He even knew what it was. He even tried to prevent it, and he wasn't successful. Darish Rava. My dichtiv. So again, we're going to go to Psukim from Tehillim, and we're going to connect this to the David and Batsheva story. Lamanetzach leDavid ba'Hashem chasiti. I trusted in God. Ech tomru lenafshi nudi harchem tzipor. Remember the bird? Okay, harchem is your mountain. Nudi is to move. So he says, how are they going to say about me, or are they going to say to me that, or to God even, that your mountain was moved like a bird or from a bird? So we're going to see right now. Amar David lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way we're going to darshan this. Ribono Shalom b'chol li'alavot alato avon. And here we're going to start to see all the requests of David to get forgiveness. Please forgive me for that sin. Shelo yomru, so that they don't say, Har shebachem tzipor nedadita. So the people don't say, your big mountain, King David, who was so strong, was moved by a bird. Like, that would be ridiculous. And it would reflect poorly on God. Darish Rabba, my dichtiv, lecha levadecha chatati, v'ara be'enecha asita, leman titzdak b'dvarecha. This is a great drasha. Okay, so in this pasuk, again in Tehillim, David says, lecha levadcha chatati, I sinned just to you, God. V'ara be'enecha asita, I did the worst in your eyes. Leman titzdak b'dvarecha, so that you should be right in your words. Tizkeh b'shoftecha, and you should win in the judgment. Amar David, so what's the drasha? Amar David lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like, why did he do it to make God right? What was God right about? Well, as I mentioned before, God didn't think he would withstand the test. So David says the following. David says, you know, God, that if I wanted to, I really could have overcome my evil inclination. Ela amina, but I said, so people won't say the Eved won the master. This is like when you play a game and you let the other side win, because it's not appropriate that you should be, someone of prominence. So he says it wouldn't be appropriate if I hadn't given in to my Yetzer, because then people would have said, oh, you see, David was right that he could handle the test and that God thought he couldn't. So I did it, right? It's kind of funny argument. I really could have not done it, but I did it for your sake. Darish Rabba, my dichtiv ki ani letzela nachon umachovi negdi tamid. Okay, here's a pasuk. Tsela is like litzloa in Hebrew is to limp. Okay, so the way they translate this pasuk for I'm ready to stumble, ani letzela nachon, I can stumble. Umachovi negdi tamid, and my pain is always with me. But tsela is also a rib. And if you remember, obviously, right, that Eve was created from the rib of Adam Rishon. And basically, Tsela is going to be a reference to woman. Okay? So what he's saying here is, Ani litzela nachon. Nachon means ready or it was appropriate. She was actually supposed to be meant for David. It was determined from the time of the creation of the world. That's Ani, right? Because obviously, Tsela is relating to creation of woman. So from the day the woman was created, it was clear that Batsheva was for David. So what was the problem? Elisha b'ayla b'machov. But she got to him painfully, meaning, had he waited till Uriah died naturally, he would have been able to marry Batsheva. But he did it in a painful manner, meaning not in the right manner, and one that caused him much pain after. Because what happens is David, after he sins with her, he feels terrible, and he's just pained and sick and all upset, and he cries and all that. We also see this in a Braita of Rabbi Yishmael. She was appropriate for him. He ate her before she ripened, meaning, again, before the time was ripe. Darish Rava, my dichtiv, another drasha of Rava, and also a reference to the Tsela. Uvitsal'i samchu v'nesafu, more Tehillim. Okay, so with my rib, but again, with my limping, what it really means is, when I'm limping, what happens? Samchu v'nesafu, everybody gathers together and mocks me because I'm limping. Nesvu alai nechim, even nechim, people who have their own disabilities, laugh at me, v'lo yadati, and I didn't know. Kar'u v'lo damu. I'm torn, but I'm not damu. We're going to darshan this word damu. Okay, in the English translation says, and they did not cease. Okay, it didn't stop. But we're going to understand damu from the language of blood. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. Amar David lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does this pasuk mean? Again, according to the drasha. Ribono shel olam, galui v'yadua lefanecha she'im hayu kor'im b'sari lo haya demi shotet. Okay, so God, you know that if they would have torn my flesh, I wouldn't have bled. Okay, now we have to understand this pasuk a little better. Bitzal'i, if we say bitzal'i is with a woman, then it's because of a woman, samchu v'nesfu. And now we're going to see this whole theme that's going to come up a lot, which is people humiliated David after this happened. And they would get together and they would mock me. Nesfu al anichim, disabled people would come and make fun of me. And karu, I was so humiliated. Now, what happens when you're humiliated? In Hebrew, they call it hilbinu panav. Hilbinu panav means his face turned white. What does it mean? All the blood left his face. So that if people would tear me, I wouldn't bleed because I was totally white. Amar David lifnei HaKadosh, sorry, we read that. V'lo od ela. Not only that, when they're sitting and learning arba mitot beitin, here's another way that they would embarrass David, okay? Obviously connected with our Masechet, the 4 mitot. Some people think it's alod nigaim. There's different versions. Maybe they're dealing with something entirely different. But either way, so while they're sitting and learning arba mitot, they stopped their learning. David, say to David, if you sleep with a married woman, what's the punishment you get? Obviously, it's a way of mocking him and saying, no, this is what you did. Amar to the hen. So now he says to them, he's got a great retort. Okay, that's the obvious answer. Okay, you get chenek. We all know that. We've learned Masechet Sanhedrin. But because you get punished, you actually have a place in the world to come. But if you humiliate someone in public, in other words, maybe you're mocking me that I'm doing a sin, but that I did a sin, but you're doing a sin right now. And your sin is worse than mine because you won't get a chelik in olam haba for humiliating me. Amar Rav Yudah Amarav, b'sha'at chalyo shel David, afilu b'sha'at chalyo shel David, even when David was sick, meaning after the incident with Batsheva, he was sick, and when he was feeling awful sick, weak, he still kiyem shmonas re'onot. He still made sure to visit his 18 wives when it was their time in the month for him to have relations with them. Remember, there's a chiyuv of ona, there's a chiyuv of having relations with your wife. It's one of those obligations a husband has to his wife. Even though he wasn't feeling well, he still managed to keep up his mitzvah. Shenemal, how do we know this? Yagati be'enchati. Okay, now we're trying to get to some tefillin that we're familiar with from tefillot. Yagati be'enchati, esche b'chol layla mitati, b'dimarti arsi emseh. Let's understand it simply, and then we'll understand the drasha. Yagati ben chati, right? I'm sighing and I'm suffering in my sighs, right? Meaning I'm struggling, but I'll still speak every night in my bed, and with my tears in my bed, I will melt. Okay, I'll melt with all the tears that I'm crying in my bed. So this is obviously describing a time when David is very sad after the sin of Batsheva, they're assuming. So how does this work? Amar Rav Yudah Amarav. Oh, no. So, okay, let's just stop here. It's already clear from here, even though it's not so clear. Rashi helps. Rashi says, esche. Now, even though esche is to speak and it's with a sin, it's like schi ma'us. So, emseh is like ma'us and schi ma'us is like disgusting things. So, what he's saying is he disgusts his bed by having relations and soiling his bed. That's really what we're trying to say. He soils his bed with his semen. And that he still does it even though he's crying, even though he's sighing and struggling. Okay, next. Amar Rav Yudah Amarav, Bikesh David la'avod avodah zarah. He actually wanted to worship idols. Where does this come from? Well, it says, and now we're moving to the story of the rebellion of Avshalom. So when Avshalom rebels against him, he wants to worship avodah zarah. Shene'emar, Vayi David ba'at harosh asher ishtachaveh sham Elohim. He comes to the Rosh. Now, nobody knows what this Rosh is. Comes to the head, which is a place where he would bow to God. Ve'ein Rosh el avodah zarah. They're saying Rosh must be avodah zarah, idols. Shenemar v'hu tzalmei reshe di dahav tav. This is from Daniel. That's why it's in Aramaic. The tzelem, the idol, the head of it was gold, was good gold. So now they're just saying, here you see head goes with idol, so it must be he wanted to worship idols. Now, we're going to see in a minute why. Now, when he goes to do this, he So Huti comes to him, his cloak is torn, he has dirt on his head because he's all upset that Avshalom is rebelling against David. Amar lo David. So now, according to the drasha, if David was worshiping avodah zarah, what does Hushi come to tell him? Hushi comes to say, what are you doing? Yomru, melech shkmotcha yavod avodas ra. They're going to say, a king like you worshipped idols? What on earth are you thinking? To which he said, Amar lo, melech shkmoti yahargenu beno. Is it better to say a king like me, his son is going to kill him? Mutav yavod avodas ra va'al yitchalel shem shamayim b'farhesia. Again, what does he say? This is like letting God win. He said, like his thing before, right? I did it because I didn't want people to say that God won, that God was wrong. I don't want Shem Shamayim to be mitchalel, like a desecrated. So what he says is this: if I get killed by my son, everyone's going to say, what kind of nation is this, that the son kills the father? So better I sin. And then it becomes clear that the son killed the father because his father worshipped idols. And then it'll be very clear, and it won't be a desecration of the name of God. And that's what motivated him, according to this, to do avodah zarah. Amar. So now Chushi says to him, he throws another thing at him. My time a kanasif yifat Torah. Why did you marry a yifat Torah? Now, the mother of Absalom was Malcha bat Talmai Melech Geshur, and the assumption is that she was captured in war. So now he says, why did you take a Yifat Torah from war? To which David answers, what do you mean? It's permitted. Remember, the Torah permits that. Ki tetzeh l'milchama, you find a beautiful woman and you want to, right? So you have to go through this whole process. But I did that. Amar le Yifat Torah Rachman Asharyeh, the Torah permits it. Amar le lo da'ashta smuchin. It might permit it, but you didn't look at what's right next to it in the Torah. What's right next to it? The samachle ki elish ben sorero moreh. You might be allowed to do, but if you do it, your son's going to be a ben sorero moreh, and that's what happened to you, that your son rebelled against you. And now we're going to go through the process of David trying to get mechila, pardoning from God. And he's like a socher kuti, like a shomroni socher. What does he do? Well, he basically, a socher kuti, there's different opinions about this, but it seems like he, instead of selling big things for a lot of money, and people say, oh, that's too much money, he sells a lot of small things for a little bit of money. And then people say, oh, it's just a little bit of money. Oh, yeah, like the dollar store, right? How much money can you spend in the dollar store? People spend lots of money in the dollar store. That's why the dollar store makes business, right? So it's like that. So he says, Amar David Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shalom. Now here we're going to darshan a pasuk, and we're going to see how each part of this, each phrase in this pasuk is David's next stage of asking for forgiveness. First, he asked for a little, and he asked for a little bit more. He asked for a little bit more, and every time God gives him his answer until the last one where God says, you've gone too far. So he says, Shkiot miyavin. Okay, this is also in our davening. Shkiot miyavin. So shkiot are mistakes. Like, who understands? People make mistakes. Okay, shav, shvikelach. So God says, I'll forgive you for your mistakes. Mistakes meaning like shkagot, things I did unwittingly, not realizing. Ministarot nakeni. Cleanse me from hidden things I've done. Shvikelach. Okay, I will. Even intentional sins you should save me from. Shvikelach. Okay, pardons him. Al yimshalu bi azetam. What is that? Delo lishtau bi rabbanan. Okay, which is don't let them rule over me. He says, I don't want the rabbis to be talking about me, meaning don't let them darshan all the psukim about the sin that I did, which is what obviously they're doing. But shvikila, this even God says, okay, I won't let them do it. At least, ad ein sof, like all the time. Viniketi mi pesharav. Now, here comes the big one. Cleanse me from big sin. To which he says, Shelo yikatev zirchoni. I don't want you to write it in the Tanakh. Wipe out the story, erase it. Okay? I just don't want people to know about it. To which God says, obviously, Amar lo efshar, I can't do that. And he proves it from the yud that was taken away from Sarai and then comes back to Yehoshua. Okay? Because Sarai is Sarai. The yud drops, she gets a hey. And Yehoshua is Hoshea, and he gets a yud. So basically, they're going to say the following. My yud shenatalti misarai omevet soveach kama shanim ad sheba Yehoshua v'osafti lo. The yud I took from Sarai was screaming for years, put me back, until finally Yehoshua came and I put the yud back. So, Shneimar, how do we know? Vayikra Moshe Losheh ben Nun Yehoshua, right? Moshe calls him Yehoshua. Kol parasha kula alacha kama v'kama. I can't take out an entire section if one yud I couldn't take out. V'niketi mi pesharav, a different drasha on that pasuk. Amar lefanav ribono shel olam mechol li al kol aloto avon kulo. Please pardon me entirely for that sin. Amal kvar atich lomo bincha lomar b'chochmato. Here's a great line. God says, I'm going to quote you a pasuk from Mishlei that your son in the future will write, and listen to what he says, and you'll see why I can't forgive you. Because Shlomo writes, Hayachte ish esh b'cheiko ubegadav lo tisarafna Will a person light up a fire on his bosom and it won't burn his clothes? Im yahalech ish al gechalim v'raglav lo tikavena. Will a person walk on coals and his feet won't burn? Kain habal eshet re'ehu. This is like someone who sleeps with his friend's wife. Lo yinakeh kol hanogea bo. Anyone who touches kol hanogea ba. Anyone who touches her will not be able to get cleansed. Amar le kol hachi nitradahu gavra. So David is pleading, what can I do? Like, is there anything I can do? To which God says, Amar le kibel alecha yisulin. You can suffer, and through your suffering you will become atoned. Kibel alav, and he accepted that. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Okay, notice they're all the same characters speaking here. Rav Yehuda Amar Rav is a lot of the statements, and Rav made a lot of statements. Shisha chodeshim nitzara David. Now we're going to talk about his suffering. He was a leper for 6 months. V'nistakai menu shechina. The shechina left him, the divine presence. U'pershumi menu Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin left him. All the rabbis wouldn't speak to him. Nitztara. How do we know? Dechtiv tachateni be'ezov ve'etar. Here's the ezov that I mentioned in flashback today. You should cleanse me with ezov and I will be pure. This is again psukim from Tehillim. Techabsenu Michelle Farber. Okay, you should wash me and I will be whitened from, right? I will be whitened like the snow. Nistakai menu shechina dechtiv. Right. So the point is he was leprous. Now you can only, the divine presence only rests in a place of happiness. So he says, and obviously he was very upset, he says, return to me happiness so that the divine presence can come back. Ruach nediva tismacheni, right? The Ruach nediva should come with me, should be with me. He says, return to me those who fear you, meaning they left him, I want them to come back, the Sanhedrin. Where we got the 6 months, so they're going to say there's a problem with the recounting of the years. It says in one place, Vayamim asher malach David al Yisrael, this is in Malachim Aleph Perek Bet. The years that David was king in Israel were 40 years, turning now to Amud Bet. Bechevron malach sheva shanim. He was melech. First he was king only in Hebron, then B'Yerushalayim malach shoshim v'shalosh shanim. So we get 7, 33, you get to 40. Uktiv, in Shmuel Bet it says, it says in Hebron it was actually 7.5. I'm thinking of like kids when they say how old they are, right? But most people don't say the half. But here they're going to note that what happened to those 6 months? Why didn't they mention those in Sefer Melachim? Must be he had sarad, he had leprosy then, and they don't count those as months of his reign. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam. Okay, we're still on David begging for forgiveness. Okay, forgive me, pardon me for my sin. God pardons him completely. Another pasuk from Tehillim, which is show me a sign. Okay, and what will happen when you show me this sign? All my enemies will see and they'll be embarrassed. In other words, I'm sick and tired of people humiliating me and thinking how bad it is I did the sin. If you're going to forgive me, at least let me benefit from it in the fact that people will stop humiliating me. My enemies will be embarrassed now because they'll see that you helped me and you pardoned me. Amar lo b'chayecha eini modia. Can't do that. I can't do it in your lifetime. Aval ani modia b'chayei Shlomo bincha. I will do it in the future in the time of Shlomo. Where are we going to get this from? Well, it's from a pasuk. B'sha'asha bana Shlomo at Beit HaMikdash. We're going to have a whole story. Now, this is all based on a pasuk, one pasuk at the end of the prayer. Shlomo has this big prayer he does in the temple when he dedicates the temple after he builds it. And I think it might be the last pasuk. I forget now. I looked it up, but I don't remember. But it's certainly at the end of this whole the whole section, or toward the end. He says this pasuk, which we're going to darshan, which is going to show that Shlomo basically announces, again, it doesn't say it explicitly, but he announces that David was pardoned. But there's a whole background story to it. So the background story is, and we've seen this story before, comes up in Masechet Shabbat, it might even be in other places. B'sha'ah shabana, I don't remember, but it definitely comes up in Shabbat. B'sha'ah shabana Shlomo Beit HaMikdash b'kesh lachnis aron lebeit kodesh HaKodeshim. Okay, Shlomo builds the whole temple, and he wants to now bring, right, everything's set, he wants to bring the Aron into the Holy of Holies. Davku sha'arim zeh bazeh, but the gates closed up, and he couldn't get it in, right, like the entrance to the Kodesh Kodeshim. Amar Esrim va'arba rina. Note this whole, what this 24, he said 24 songs. Some people say it's 24 different Tehillim. Some people say it's other things. Anyway, he says it's 24 songs. V'lo na'ana. Doesn't help. Amar, so then he says, and this is a very famous parak of Tehillim that you've heard many times, Su'u Sha'arim Rashechem, and they're saying this happened at the time where he basically says this Tehillim, right? Open your gates, V'nasu Pitrei Olam, right? V'yavo Melech HaKavod, and we can bring Melech HaKavod into the temple, right? We want to bring the Aron, which is kind of carrying the words of God in it, the Luchot, and we want to bring that into the Kodesh Kodashim. Miza Melech HaKavod, Hashem Yizuz Gibor, Hashem Gibor Melchama, right? God is so great. V'ne'amar Su Sha'arim Rashechem, U'su Pitrei Olam, V'yavo Melech HaKavod, right? Allow the Melech HaKavod to come in. Below Nana, it doesn't help. Kevan Sha'amar, and here's the pasuk. Hashem Elokim al tashe pnei Mashiachecha. Don't turn away the face of the panim of your Mashiach. Zachura lechasdei David avdecha. You should remember the chasadim of what David HaMelech did. In other words, he brings in the name of David HaMelech, miyad na'ana, and then he's answered. Now, what better sign is this? That David clearly was accepted by God and his tshuva was accepted if David is the one who ends up resolving this huge problem in the temple. At that moment, all the people who hated David, you can see, David talks all the time about his sonim in Tehillim, right? All these references to Tehillim are these psukim about my enemies against me, my this, right? So they're basically saying the enemies are the people who basically humiliated him after the sin of Batsheva, and they turned like the bottom of the pot, which is all blackened, meaning their face turned black, meaning they were humiliated. Remember, that's what David asked for. They'll be humiliated now for the fact that they humiliated me when God had actually forgiven me, and then everyone knew that he was forgiven. Okay, thus ends the section of David, where if I had to say the main focus of the section of David is all about his repentance. And that's going to be foil to Geichazi and Yeshu Anotzri, who don't end up really looking for forgiveness. And we'll see why in this section. Geichazi, dichtiv. Vayelech Elisha Damesek. So the story of Geichazi, again, we'll talk about it again very briefly, and we'll see a bit more inside. We'll see it inside. Naaman is the Sartz of Avaram. He gets leprosy. He doesn't know how to cure it. He hears, we're going to see, he hears from some woman who is captured by the Arameans, and she's living there, a Jewish woman. There's this guy named Elisha. He can help you. Okay, he goes to Elisha. We'll see exactly how he gets healed. But Elisha heals him. Then he wants to give Elisha whatever he brought with him, he wants to give to Elisha. And Elisha won't accept any gifts. And Geichazi runs after him. Without Elisha, he thinks Elisha doesn't notice. He runs after and he takes the gifts. Okay, that's the basic story. So now it says, Vayelech Elisha Damesek. Now, why did he go to Damesek? Where was he going? Rabbi Yochanan, Shalach lachzir Geichazi b'tshuva v'lo chazal. He went to get Geichazi to repent, but he wouldn't. Amar lo, here's the scene. He says to him, Chazor b'cha, go do tshuva. Amar lo, kach mekublani mimcha, this is what I learned from you. You taught me this. Hachotei u'machtia tarabim emas bekim v'yado lasot tshuva. One who sins and causes others to sin. Now, according to my story, he didn't cause others to sin. We're going to have to see what did he do to cause others to sin. We don't allow him to do tshuva. Okay, so what did he do that made other, right? And Geichazi basically gives up. He says, there's no way my tshuva is going to be accepted, so there's no point to do it. And you taught me this, Elisha. So what did he do? Some people say, Evan sho'evet talal l'chatat yiravam midah ben shamayim la'aretz. He basically created a scenario where he took a rock, a stone that could raise up the egel, the calves, the golden calves that Yeravam put up, suspended them in midair. It's like a magnet. He created some sort of magnet, okay, that was able to suspend it, and it looked like the egel zahav was suspended in midair, which made people amazed by this miracle and said, oh, wow, this is a God, we must worship. Or, some people say, Shem chakak b'fiyah, he put a name in its mouth, he like those talking dolls that I had when I was a little kid. It was like a new thing that all of a sudden you could pull a string and the doll would talk. Well, apparently it existed then somehow. He was able to make some miracle, not a miracle happen, but some contraption that he put something in its mouth and it was able to utter these words. So it would say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha lo yeh lecha elohim achirim. It would say the first two dibrot, I am your God. You can't have other gods. And people thought this was God and they prayed to it. Some people say he chased away all the Talmidei Chachamim that we're learning with Elisha. He chased them off. Where do we get this from? Well, it says after Vayomru b'nei Nevi'im el Elisha. There's this story that comes up where the B'nai Nevi'im come to Elisha and they say, the place where we're all living, there's just not enough room for all of us. So, Michlal da'ad hashtalo of a faishe. It sounds like it was all of a sudden there were too many people. What, there was a population explosion? No, it must be Geichazi had pushed them all away, and now he was gone and they came back. So, okay, that's some sort of remez for that. Okay, now we get to our section where the first part that's removed from the text. So I'm going to read it in the Koran because the Koran has it. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, this is the lesson of the story of Geichazi. And it's really a criticism of Elisha. Tanu Rabbanan. Olam te small docha v'yamin mekarevet. You should always push people off with your left and bring them in with the right. Basically saying, if someone's doing something wrong, you should rebuke them, but you should much more work on, because your yamin is always stronger, with your right hand, bring them back in. And what happened? Elisha tried to tell him to do tshuva. Geichazi said, you taught me, I can't. And then that was it. Like Elisha just left it. So Elisha should have done more to bring him back. And it's Elisha's fault that Geichazi ended up in without a portion of the world to come. So they say now, Lo Elisha shedachavo leGeichazi b'shtei yadayim. He pushed him off with two hands instead of one pushing and one pulling back, bringing him in. And here's the part that's taken out. Below Yehoshua ben Perachia shedachavo leYeshu anotzri b'shtei yadav. And not like Yehoshua ben Perachia, who pushed off Yeshu anotzri with both his hands. Now, Yehoshua ben Perachia was the teacher of Jesus. And according to what we're going to learn, he pushed him off completely, and it was his fault that what happened with Jesus happened. Okay, so let's read the story. So first, we're back now in the regular text. If you have a regular Gemara without the Koran, who adds the extra stuff. In my Gemara, it's actually in really small letters on the side in the Hagahot and Siyunim, but it's easier to read from the Koran. Okay, so let's look. So now let's talk about the story of Geichazi. Geichazi dichtiv, as it says. Vayomer Naaman, ho'el kach kikrayim, vayivtzar bo, vayatzer kikrayim kesef. So he says, take two. This is what he says to Geichazi, and he convinces him, and he binds them the money. And then when he comes back to Elisha, Vayomer elav Elisha, me'ayin Geichazi, where were you coming from, Geichazi? Vayomer lo halach avdecha ana va'ana. I didn't go anywhere. I know what you're talking about. He lies. Vayomer elav lo libi halach kasher afach ish me'almer kavto lekratecha. Don't you think my heart went? What, you don't think my heart went when, meaning I'm the prophet, I see everything. When the guy turns in his chariot toward you, ha'et lakachat et kesef, v'lakachta begadim, and that it was it the time to take money and to take clothes, v'zeitim and olives and kramim and vineyards and son ubakar v'avadim u'shfachot and livestock and slaves. Okay, saying you took all these things. Now, the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Well, Mishakal kulehai, Geichazi didn't take all those. There are 8 things listed there. He didn't take all those 8 things. All he gave him was kesef u'begadim u'deshaka. He just got money and clothes. So what are all these 8 things? The time Elisha was sitting learning, Perek Shmona Shvatzim, if you remember, it's a chapter in Shabbat. So he was sitting learning Shmona Shvatzim. There's an obvious reference here, Shmona Shvatzim and Shmona things that he lists in the, right? That's a remez. The fact that he lists the 8 things that Geichazi really didn't take, it's because he was learning Shmona Shvatzim. Okay, we'll see the connection soon, although you won't really get the connection to the Shvatzim. At that time, Naaman Sartzva Melech Aram Hayam Tzorah. Okay, so he was leper. Here we get the whole story. Amrale Revita. There was a young woman, Ishtabai Me'ar Yisrael. She was a hostage from the Jews who was living there. So she says, if you go to Elisha, he'll cure you. Ki'ata, when he gets there, Amale Zil Tfol Biyardain. Elisha says, go dip in the Jordan. Amarle Achucha Kamachayechet Bi. Are you mocking me? He says, I'm going to dip in the Jordan. That's going to cure my leprosy. The people who were with Naaman said to him, what do you care? Zil nase, try it, right? Like people who try to, do all these skulas, like, is it really going to help? Well, it doesn't hurt. Like, go dunk in the Jordan. So he goes in the Jordan, and in fact, he's healed. He says, I'll give you everything I have. He didn't want to accept it. Geichazi goes from Elisha. He takes what Naaman was willing to offer, and he puts it away somewhere. Ifkid means, right, like a pikadon. He puts it and he hides it somewhere. Ki'ata, when he comes back, Chazia Elisha litzarat avaparchi laveresh. Now we're going to know why he figured it out, because when he comes back to Elisha, he sees leprosy on his face. It's starting to come out on his head. Amarle, which he realizes connects with the leprosy of Naaman. He figures it out. Amarle Rasha, Yigia Eitli Tol Schar Shmona Shchatzim. He says, now here's where he dachau to b'shtei adav. In this version, he doesn't ask him to do tshuva like in the earlier section. It says, now's your time to get the reward for the Torah you learned with me, the Shmona Shvatzim. Get it in this world because you're going to, and then you won't have anything left for you in the world to come. And that's what we see. The tzarad of Naaman will be on you, for you and your children forever. Meaning, you will never get out of this, even in Olam Haba. And he came out from before him, full of leprosy. White, like snow, because he was all white from the leprosy. And we see this reference to the fact that he and his sons had leprosy from this other pasuk, which says, there's a story that starts out there with these 4 mitzaraim in the entrance to by the gate. And Amar B'Yochanan, who were the 4 people? Geichazi u'shloshet banav. Okay, him and his 3 sons, who all got leprosy. Okay, now we have to go to the cut out section. Like I said, this daf is long, and even though we should be at the end of the daf now, we're not, because we have a big long section to read. So Yehoshua ben Perachia Mahi. What's the story with Yehoshua ben Perachia? Kedikatlinu Yanai Malka Rabbanan. Also Yehoshua ben Perachia v'Yeshu l'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. So Yehoshua ben Perachia and Yeshu run away to Egypt when Yanai Melech, if you remember, we learned that story, was killing all the rabbis. So they ran away so they'd be saved. Kiavashlama, when they made peace and Yanai Melech got back to, with the rabbis, Shalach, if you remember, Shimon ben Shattach was still there, and they were brothers-in-law. Shalach le Shimon ben Shattach. He sends to Yehoshua ben Perachia. He sends the following message: Mini Yerushalayim Yer Kodesh lechi Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. This is a message from Jerusalem, the holy city, to Alexandria of Egypt. Achoti ba'ali sharoi b'toch. My sister city. Ba'ali sharoi b'tochech. My husband is in your midst, meaning Yehoshua ben Perachia. And I'm here all alone, meaning come back. So come ata, so he comes back with his student Yeshu. They end up in an inn on the way back. They treat them with great respect. Amar, so Yehoshua ben Perachia says, what a nice inn. To which Jesus responds, Amar le, Rebbe einah trutot. The eyes of the innkeeper's wife are very either narrow, long, something. Make some comment about her eyes. Amar le rasha, bekach ata osek. This is what you're doing? You evil person, you're looking at the women? That's not appropriate. Afik arba mea shipurei v'shamte. He takes out 400 shofarot, he blows them and puts them in excommunication. Ata lekamei kamazimian. So Yeshu keeps trying to come back and say, come on, accept my forgiveness. Amarle, and this is why the David story is really a foil to this whole story. Kablan, accept me. Love a kamashchpe. Yehoshua ben Perachia totally ignores. Okay, remember, we're bringing the story because you're supposed to be, right, push off with the small, but bring back in with the yamin, and he's not. He pushed him off with shtei adav, he totally didn't accept it. Yom echad of a kari kriyat shema. One day is in the middle of kriyat shema when Yeshu comes. Ata lekameh, sever lekabule. This time, Yehoshua ben Perachia decides I'm going to accept his tshuva. I don't know if it's because he was in the middle of Kriyat Shema or somehow he decides on that day I'm going to accept him. However, now he's in the middle of Shema. You can't talk in Shema. So when Yeshu comes, he gives him a little gesture with his hand saying, wait for me. But husavar midcha kadachele. Now, Jesus figures, this is in general what he does to me every day. He must be pushing me off. Azol zakif levente, and he had enough. This pushed him over the edge. And he picks up a brick, he stands it up, vishtachavala, and he bows to it. And he starts worshiping idols. Amar le hadraba. And now he says, come do tshuva. But it's too late. Amar le, Jesus says to him, kach mekublani mimcha, kol achotei umachtiat harabim, ein maspikim biado lasot tshuva. Anyone who sins and causes others to sin, you taught me this already. This is exactly the quote we heard before to Elisha. It's too late. You can't even do tshuva. Va'amar mar. And this is what they say about Yeshu. Yeshu kishef ve'sit ve'decha Yisrael. He did sorcery. He incited the Jews to become idol worshippers, and he led them astray. And that's the end of the section that was taken out. And that's why we see how important it is to bring people in, because there's always, this goes with the whole theme of Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba, right? Even though people lose it, but there's a way to bring them in, And it's our responsibility to work on doing that. It's not just the bad people, it's the people who aren't helping them to come back. Okay, then we have one last line about this. Tanya Amar B'Shimon ben Elazar, Yetzer Tinok V'Isha Tesmol Dochav Yamim Mekarev. Okay, these three things, your Yetzer Hara, you should push off, but also bring it closer, like to deal with it. And a tinok, a child, this is how you should raise your children. Be, on the one hand, rebuke them, on the other hand, be loving. And also your wife. Okay, I don't know, it doesn't sound so nice to treating your wife like that, but okay. Tanu Rabbanan. Shlosha chalaim chala Elisha. Now we're going to talk about Elisha. There were 3 times he got sick. Echad shigra dubim b'tinokot. Okay, there's always this assumption that after someone does something bad, they feel remorseful and then they get sick. So we had this thing where they were calling him baldy, and then he basically curses them, and the lions eat these 40. I think it was 42 children, if I remember correctly. Anyway, that's not lions. That's the other stories. The bears. The other, he got sick after he pushed off Geichazi, because then again, he's all upset for what he did. Echad shemeitbo, and then when he actually died. Shneimar, how do we know? And this is the whole reference. Elisha chalat yamupo. He got sick, this disease that causes death, which sounds like he got sick before, and he didn't die from it. Okay, this is a famous line. Now we're going to talk about this. We've seen this before. Ad Avraham lo yazikna. Okay, there wasn't old age. People didn't age. There were no, wrinkles and all that. And what was the problem? Well, Kol Techaze LaAvraham Amar HaYitzchak. They saw Avraham, they thought it was Yitzchak. Kol Techaze LaYitzchak Amar HaAvraham. And it bothered Avraham. By Avraham Rachamei Dilahave Lezikna. So Avraham asked for it. So we can always thank Avraham for all those people who are struggling with getting old, looking old, right? It's all Avraham who did it. Shneimal Avraham Zakein Babi Yamin. How do we get it? Because it didn't say anything about old before. Now, people lived 900 years, it never said anything about being old. First references to Avraham. Ad Yaakov Lav Achulsha. People didn't get weak when they got sick. They just died, okay? Immediate death. And it was annoying because people couldn't prepare, right? Yaakov's the prime example of someone who has a lot of time before he dies to give all the blessings to his grandchildren, to his sons. By Rachamei v'Havechulsha. So he asked for Rachamim that he would have some time to prepare for death. Shneimar, Vayom li Yosef kinei avicha choleh. Right? He says, your father's sick, and then he has all this time. He doesn't die immediately. Ad Elisha lo inish chalish to mitpa. People got weak and got sick, they died. Only in Elisha's time did people start healing from disease. Ba'ata Elisha by Rachamei, because he asked for Rachamim v'itpach. And people got better. Shneimar, how do we know? Because Elisha chalat chayo asher yamupo. Says he got sick from the disease that causes death, which means that, before that wasn't right, meaning before that he got sick and got better, and that must be the first time it happened. Okay. Dor Mabul, new Mishnah. Dor Mabul Elam Chelik Olam Haba. So now we finally finished that very long Mishnah. Now we're on the new Mishnah. Generation of the flood, that whole generation doesn't have a Chelik Olam Haba, ve'enom dimidin, and they won't stand in future judgment in the world to come. Okay, they won't have din, they won't have ruach, they basically lose everything. This is, by the way, after the Mabul, it's with the Bnei Elohim, it's the very end of Parsha Breshit. Dor Plaga, these are the people who built the Migdal Bavel, tried to get to the heavens, we'll talk about them in the Gemara. So it says it both times, 2 times. Vayafetz Hashem, God dispersed them. Ba'olam hazeh, u'misham mefitzam Hashem, and from there God dispersed them. Lo olam haba. That means they got dispersed also in this world, also in the next world. Anshe Stom, people of Stom, elam chelik olam haba, shene'emar. Anshe Stom ra'im v'chataim la'Hashem ma'od. Why ra'im v'chataim? Ra'im ba'olam hazeh, chataim la'olam haba. Okay, they're going to always be sinners, even in olam haba. They have no portion. Avalum din b'din, but they do stand in judgment. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, he disagrees and says, Elu ve'elu din b'din. Enum din b'din. None of them get judgment in the future, in the world to come. And continue with this tomorrow. We'll see his psukim where he proves it from, and we'll finish the mission. So, like I said, we dealt with David mainly, then Geichazi, then Yehoshua ben Perachia and his student Yeshu on Tzri. And basically, we see the issue of repentance and how much repentance is a possibility, and how it's the job of the community or the rabbis or the leaders to try to create opportunities for people to repent and not to push people off completely. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shema B'Salat Tovat.